afraid most of the people we get in here don't know a Bordeaux from a claret.
Bordeaux is a claret.
Oh, Bordeaux is a claret, yes, but they wouldn't know that. No, you obviously drink a lot. Wine, I mean.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Fawlty Towers podcast, where neither of us knows our Bordeaux from our clarets, but we do like to drink a lot.
I'm drinking right now.
How are you?
I'm not bad, Gerry. How are you this week?
Drunk.
As usual.
Fun episode.
Yeah, this is a good one.
I think it's one that stands out for many people.
It's interesting though, because there's not really been any particularly weak episodes, and if you look, I think IMDb has them all fairly highly scored.
Mm-hmm.
Popular, universally.
Yeah.
I don't think that's true. They're not universally popular, but widely popular.
Earthly popular.
Is it one of your personal favourites?
It's certainly up there, but yeah, as you said, being only 12.
It's in my top 10, I would say that.
Before we begin this week, Ian, can I ask you to request some social interaction?
Yeah, it's a shame for me. I don't get much social interaction, but if you want to help with that, you can find us all over the internet. We're on fawltytowerspodcast.com, where there's a separate post up for each episode where you can chat either about what we've got to say or your own thoughts, recollections, personal favourite moments about each episode. On social media, we're not Instagrammers, but you can find us on Twitter or on Facebook at Fawlty Podcast. And we're happy to engage with each of you there as best we can and keep the chat going about some great moments. It would be a big help to us, and it would help more people find the podcast if you could take a few moments out of your day to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. Preferably don't do it if you don't like the show, but hopefully by the time we got to episode 4 you're not still listening if you don't like the show. It would be great if you could leave us a good review, because although it might not be where you listen to podcasts, it is where the majority of folk find new shows. So it would be very helpful and we'd appreciate it very much.
We would indeed. Okay, let's start this week. Do you have a summary prepared?
As always.
Crack on.
In The Hotel Inspectors, a tip from Sybil's friend Audrey leads Basil to suspect a particularly demanding guest may well be visiting to prepare a report for a prominent hotel guide, and offer the gentleman an uncharacteristically accommodating service. When the guest turns out to be a spoons salesman, his increasingly challenging requests begin to fall on deaf ears. But can Basil identify the real inspector before earning the hotel a terrible review?
I don't think he can.
It's changed times, isn't it? Nowadays it would be every guest is potentially on TripAdvisor leaving a horrific review.
And a good thing too. Unless you're a hotelier.
Yeah. Imagine having to give good service to everybody. That must be a pain.
We're at the reception area. Basil is in the office and he's having to listen to Sybil's machine gun laugh and body gossip about one of her friends with Audrey.
He's not really enjoying it. I think he's trying to read the paper, maybe.
Read the paper and have a smoke.
I've not seen that before.
And I don't think we see it again.
Okay, well maybe he's just doing it to annoy Sybil.
He comes through to get a box of matches, but is given just one.
And no way to light it.
Before a guest with a map appears. And Sybil does her usual. She doesn't deal with the client request herself. She continues this nonsensical conversation and calls for Basil.
And he says, "You mean through where you are, dear?" So obviously he's highlighting her inaction.
And after this, he attempts to deal with the verbose Mr. Hutchinson.
I'm so sorry to have kept you waiting, sir. I had no idea my wife was so busy.
Fear not, kind sir, it matters not one whit.
Beg your pardon?
It matters not one whit. Time is not pressing on me, fortunately. Now, some information, please. This afternoon, I have to visit the town for sundry purposes which will be of no interest to you, I'm quite sure. But nevertheless, I shall require your aid in getting for me some sort of transport, some hired vehicle, that is, to get me to my first port of call.
You all right?
Oh, yes. Yes, I find the air here most invigorating.
I see. What did I gather from your first announcement that you want a taxi?
In a nutshell.
Case, all right.
At 2 o'clock, please.
Well, there's the number of the local firm.
Now, please, could you get it for me? Because I never use the telephone if I can avoid it.
Why not?
Risk of infection. So, when I finish, right? Now, I have a rendezvous at 5 o'clock at this address, which I must reach from the post office in Queen's Square. Now, as the map is sadly inadequate, I would be very grateful if you could draw me a diagram of the optimum route.
Well, I mean, may I ask what's wrong with the map?
Well, it's got curry on it.
Well, look, it's perfectly simple. You go to the end of Queen's Parade and... No, just listen.
No, I just want a diagram,
No, it's
please.
really very simple.
Well, I'd rather have a diagram if it won't put you out.
Well, it does put me out.
Well, I'd like it all the same.
Basil!
This man sounds high maintenance.
He does. However, I think we had a disagreement earlier, Ian. You thought Basil was in the right here, but I don't think so. Mr. Hutchinson is certainly annoying, but, you know, that's no reason for Basil not to give him good service.
I'm sure Basil would be perfectly happy to give him good service if he was not annoying.
But annoyance is subjective.
It's not that subjective with this guy. Mind you, that thing about the telephones, you're much like that. You wouldn't touch a telephone that somebody else had been using, would you?
Well, these days, a bit monkish. These days, it's perfectly understood and acceptable. A mild form of OCD. I was actually on the... I took my little boy on his first trip on the Glasgow Underground, the Clockwork Orange.
Did you touch anything?
Well, no, but he insisted on sort of swinging around on the bars, and I tried to explain that it was dirty. Obviously, to his eyes, he says, no, it's not dirty. I said, yeah, but those little germs, stop it. Fortunately, I brought wipes with us, so when we came off and he wanted to hold my hand, he was wiped thoroughly down. Anyway, back to this episode. After a short stare out, and as we heard there, a snap from Sybil, he agrees to draw a map.
There's a bit of a problem, though.
He can't find a pen.
They're not where they're usually kept.
No, because Sybil, after 12 years, we can get back to that, has moved them. Apparently he always loses them.
Yeah, they're now in a box which says Ben's.
Before we got on to Ben, you asked, and perhaps was it the first episode, how long they had owned this hotel, and it's answered.
Yes, dozen painful years for Basil.
It would have been. See, that's the thing. You can start off with grandiose ideas and a vision for your hotel, but after 12 years, you'll understand the market, the people, the reputation, who's coming there. You can't really...
Well, this is the thing. Has he just suddenly decided he wants to raise the tone, or has he always been like this and it just never goes anywhere?
Well, that's my question. Yeah, I mean, suddenly wanting to raise the tone without a complete refurb and a new marketing employer strategy isn't going to work.
It seems unlikely. Folk will have preconceived ideas about the hotel already in the local area. Folk from further afield might not know, though. Without TripAdvisor, for example, or whatever the equivalent of the day, the hotel guide.
Yeah, sure, but there is it'll be a certain standard of hotel, whether it's got a star rating or not. You can't pretend that your little maybe 2-star hotel is 5-star luxury.
You don't have the facilities, yeah.
No.
He's got a tennis table.
Do we think that perhaps, well, that's a point, but perhaps when they took it over, it was in better condition? Maybe the previous owners had maintained it well, and through...
They used Stubbs rather than O'Reilly.
Yes, but through lack of know-how, experience, they've let it deteriorate.
Maybe
to
through
this
lack
day.
of money as well.
Yeah, but that would be tied into lack of experience.
Yeah.
They don't know how to manage and run a hotel.
Who knows? Perhaps.
Anyway, let's go back to Ben's pens.
Yes, Sybil points out, I think she ended her phone call. She kind of breaks off from her phone call to explain the obvious to Basil, that the pens are in the box marked pens.
Yes, and he argues that this looks like a B, so he asks another guest, Mr. Walt, for his view.
Yeah, he thinks it's a P.
Yeah, he agrees with Sybil.
Yeah, but I think that's still a bit unreasonable. If you're not looking for a box, you would quite easily miss that. If you're skimming, looking for a pen, you're not looking for a box.
Sure. At the same time, Hutchinson is having problems IDing the local post office on the map drawn by Basil, as he didn't recognise the abbreviation used.
Yes, it says P off. But he thinks it looks like boff.
Which is a locale.
Yeah, it's a circular argument, isn't it?
Yes, and then Mr. Walt is again brought into the discussion when he is harangued into agreeing with Basil that it reads P off. And he takes offence at this.
I think he just doesn't want to be involved in the conversation at all. He wants to check into the hotel.
He does. So Manuel appears to take his luggage up to his room, and we have a nice visual joke as both he and Basil have found a more effective medium of communication.
Yes, they use picture cards and number cards to show where they're, or what the instruction is, and Manuel responds with an okay.
It'd have been good to see that continued throughout the two
'Cause
seasons.
It's not exactly like they get on top of things, is it?
No, and they've got a solution here already.
Yeah.
Anyway, after confirming his taxi for 2 p.m, Hutchinson annoys Basil further by telling him that if anyone wants him, he will be in the lounge. I think Basil just is annoyed this person thinks he's important enough to have someone want him.
Yeah, I just think Basil is done with him already, within minutes of his arrival.
Yeah, I mean, there's a slight, I suppose, contradiction here. He isn't your average guest. Is he maybe borderline the type of guest that Basil wants? Someone who is full of himself, who is wanted.
But is perhaps Basil identifying this as fake in this guy, or as not genuine class? So therefore he's dismissive of the man. He's not genuinely, it's an affectation, he thinks, or Basil believes this isn't a natural use of language.
Possibly, but he never lets that be known. He doesn't say to Sybil, this guy's obviously at it.
No, he just doesn't like him because he's annoying.
Yeah.
I mean, he does come across a bit like he's had a fight with a thesaurus and the two of them got themselves mixed up a wee bit.
He does indeed.
Either he's being translated into Chinese and back again before the words come out.
Understandably annoyed with Sybil, Basil walks through to the office and says that he wishes she would help a bit more rather than constantly refurbishing herself.
Yeah, it's interesting. He does take it up directly with her. We talked, I think, in an earlier episode about him not doing this. Mm-hmm. But here he does, and she almost plays the victim a little bit. She says she's had a tough morning.
Yeah. Well, she has a cheek to say that.
She's been on the phone to her pal the whole time.
Yes. I liked his response. I think there was a sarcastic quip in there about her being too busy to perm her ears.
Yeah, he calls her his little nest of vipers.
But this call that she was on, I mean, I don't believe for 1 second that business was the primary motive for speaking to Audrey, but she has gleaned something. What was that?
Yeah, there's hotel inspectors in town.
Yeah, 3 of them.
Somebody called Bill, is that Audrey's partner? Did we hear about this before?
I think so, yeah.
Is he the one that left her? I don't know. Anyway, this Bill, whoever he is, heard 3 men in a pub talking about their experiences in another hostelry.
Indeed. So obviously this panics Basil, and he even makes him check his attitude towards the Major out at reception when he asks for his paper.
Yes, Basil's going to phone this guy Bill, so that's why he's back out in reception.
Hutchinson reappears.
Right, I can't believe you're telling me Hutchinson's not annoying. Basil's sitting there on the phone.
No, I didn't say he was. He's very annoying. However...
And not unreasonable?
Okay, this next bit is unreasonable, yeah.
He can see Basil's on the phone. Mm-hmm. He just sits there dinging the bell, telling him he's not dialed yet, so you can deal with him first.
Yeah, that's very rude. I'll give you that, yeah.
I think Basil shows a great degree of restraint here. Obviously, he's got the whole inspector thing on his mind.
What is Hutchinson looking for?
He wants to reserve the BBC Two channel.
Yeah.
I don't understand what he means by this. Does he mean put the TV in the lounge onto BBC Two and don't change it for the time that I want to watch this programme?
Yes, that's what he means, yeah.
How do you reserve the channel? I think he means reserve the TV.
No, he means between 9 and 9:30, he wants to have BBC Two on the TV, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a weird way to phrase it. I suppose he's a weird phrasing person generally.
What was it, a documentary on Squawking Bird?
Yeah, I think I'm Native American group of tribes, yeah.
So Basil treats him with the usual and, in this case, understandable disdain until Hutchinson mentions that he has a lot of experience with hotels in his line of work, along with his friends, and that many other establishments have a booking system in place.
Yeah, they've introduced this facility, and he suggests that Basil do the same.
And his attitude changes at this.
And we see a sort of marble rolling in Basil's head here, as he has the idea that this could be the inspector. But Hutchinson has another suggestion.
What's that?
He wants to hire a TV for his room.
He does, but Basil, I don't think, can facilitate this. However, he does agree to immediately implement Hutchinson's reservation request.
Yeah, he doesn't have another television, presumably, available to rent out for the room, but he is willing to implement this scheme, yes.
And on top of this, the grovelling Basil confirms that they do have a table tennis table that whilst not in absolutely mint condition, could certainly be used in an emergency.
I understand this is one of John Cleese's favourite lines for the entire run.
I think it's the most favourite line of John Cleese's.
I just like the imagery of an emergency table tennis, the requirement for an emergency table tennis game.
Sure. Polly is then introduced to Hutchinson by Basil, although he is not happy that they are in disagreement about an incident at breakfast.
Yeah, Polly was trying to pour some juice for Mr. Hutchinson, who pulled his glass away because he is annoying and rude.
And quite patronising. I think he calls her a silly girl or something, or a naughty girl a
He
bit.
tries to blame her, and Basil stops her from retorting
Yes.
too strongly, and after she leaves, he praises her and her work to Mr. Hutchinson.
He does indeed, before greeting Miss Tibbs and Gatsby and inviting Hutchinson through to the dining room for an early lunch. After all, it's a hotel, not a borstal. I think Sybil had made that point earlier that Basil ignored, but now is taking on board.
Yeah, Borstal Young Offenders Institution, if anyone doesn't know.
Scum.
I think it's actually a place in England where there was one, and I think it maybe in the 70s came to be the generic term.
Like Bedlam.
Yeah.
Sybil is a bit confused about Basil's accommodation of Hutchinson and points out that the chef won't be ready as it's not lunchtime. But Basil, he tries to make the point to her that he believes Hutchinson to be an inspector.
I don't think at any stage in these first 4 episodes we've seen any indication that Basil and Sybil are on the same wavelength when it comes to non-verbal communication.
No.
Anything that's said, fair enough, but anything that's hinted, indicated, otherwise implied, no.
In the dining room, Polly asks the cheeky but puzzled Hutchinson if he is the Duke of Kent after he orders a Spanish omelette, before Basil comes through to be questioned about the freshness of the vegetables.
Yeah, and Hutchinson takes the odd position that the frozen peas are not acceptable. I think it's well known that frozen peas are better than fresh peas.
Oh, it is now, but I don't think it would have been the accepted belief back in the 70s.
Yeah, because they didn't agree with science and
No.
stuff. Crazy.
Well, I think even today there is a nutritional illiteracy amongst many people. It's still rife.
Although I suppose using phrases like the freshness is locked in doesn't actually ring true. It sounds like a marketing slogan.
Of course it is. And things like, low fat, people believing that that's actually good for you. Massively high in calories from carbs or protein or whatever, but oh yes, I can probably eat as much of this as I want. I won't get fat because it's low in fat. Marketing nonsense, and it's...
Yeah. I think you get low-fat digestive biscuits, which basically are just even drier versions of digestive biscuits, and they have the exact same calories per biscuit as regular digestives.
Of course. I mean, low fat, a can of Coke is low in fat. There's no fat in it. It's jam-packed full of sugar.
Yeah.
So that's where the calories come from.
Yeah.
Anyway, why are we talking about this? Oh yeah, we're talking about...
Frozen peas for
frozen
the omelette.
peas, yeah.
So Mr. Hutchinson changes his order.
To, what, a cheese salad?
Yeah, it's even less good for him.
Oh, it's terrible for you.
A Spanish omellette's a far better way to go.
Too high in fat. But high in protein as well.
Well, fair enough.
Anyway.
I had a really bad cheese salad once. Let's move on.
I've never had one. Too much cheese in it. I like a little bit of cheese in my salad.
It wasn't meant to be a cheese salad. I ordered a regular salad.
Right.
But it came with... It would probably be...
But that's this place down in the air. We won't mention it.
It was
Yeah.
a place in here. And I think I might have told you about this
You have,
before.
yeah.
It was maybe about 250 grams of cheese cubed and just put in the salad. It was like they were having maybe an old 70s style cocktail party and they'd run out of pineapple and cocktail sticks and thought they'd just chuck all the cubed cheese into my salad.
And pickled onions.
Yeah, they didn't have them either.
Yeah, so it was just lots of cheese on a
It's just they maybe made too much cheese for their
Anyway,
hedgehog thing.
let's go off this.
Yes, moving on. Manuel shows up as Basil heads to the kitchen. Manuel comes out to lay the napkins.
Okay, so there are a couple of things before Manuel does come out.
I suppose you get why the peas are not good enough for Mr. Hutchinson. He says they're an integral part. They can't just be left out.
Yeah, and also he suggests that the hotel avails themselves of sufficient quantities of said items in the future, and I think, again, this just annoys Basil. And he also orders a ginger beer and a glass of fresh water.
Thinks he's in the famous 5.
Yeah. Before going to take a call that obviously worries Basil.
Yeah, no,
He's
Basil's
suspicious about,
concerned,
perhaps he's taking a call from the editor or something like that, yeah. And as you rightly said, Manuel comes through to set the tables.
He's got an odd procedure.
What's that?
He puts all the napkins down in one side of the room, and then individually takes one at a time to the opposite side of the room to place on the table.
Yeah. Mr. Walt enters, and after complaining that it is not a good day and that he is homesick, Manuel has further communication problems in getting him seated and eventually puts him where Mr. Hutchinson had been sitting.
Yeah, because he's away to make his phone call, obviously.
Yeah.
Basil comes out at this stage with Hutchinson's drinks to find Mr. Walt sitting at the table. And Mr. Walt, we've seen this in previous episodes, people aren't happy if you move them.
No.
And this is the second time that Walt's getting moved. And
Yeah, he harasses him here.
yeah, no, absolutely. He says that he did ask the waiter, but Basil points out that Manuel is useless and he might as well have asked the cat.
And that is the first mention of the Fawlty Towers cat.
I think there's an implication here. The audience is meant to think that Walt's the inspector.
Okay.
I believe. That's my interpretation here, because we are told there's an inspector coming.
Mm-hmm.
Basil's assumed it is Hutchinson. The obvious comedy thing would be, no, it's this other guy who's getting the bad treatment while Hutchinson's getting pandered to.
Sure.
So the audience is pointed in that direction.
Yeah. I hadn't really considered it because it's been so long since I've known what the outcome
Yeah,
is that
yeah.
you don't. But yeah, I think if you were watching it afresh, that's what you would suspect. Mr. Walt then orders a bottle of the Alex Corton 65.
Is that an expensive wine? You're a wine expert.
Well, I'm not an expert. I mean, no, obviously not back then. It wouldn't have been that expensive.
It was quite far down the list.
But I don't think you're getting the equivalent of your $7,000 bottles of wine at Fawlty Towers.
I don't even think Fawlty Towers, it's not even going to be a £100 bottle of wine, is it? It's not going to be keeping a supply of those. And
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And nor should he. But I mean, that's the type of thing that Basil might, with his lack of business sense, think that to impress some guests, he should invest. Because you need to remember, I mean, I'm not a restaurateur, but you don't want to be investing cash into things that are going to be sitting on the shelf. You know, it's effectively throwing it away. No one's buying an equivalent of a £500 bottle of wine at Fawlty Towers.
Yeah. Well, my thinking was that he might put wines on the list that he didn't have to make it seem like he had a much more extensive and interesting wine list than he really does.
I suspect that happens quite a lot today. I mean, I've been in a few restaurants recently where there are bottles of wine at, $5,000 and things like that, and you're thinking, do you know what?
Can you ensure that?
This is in Glasgow. It's not in London where there's lots of high financiers who might go out and spend the money on a $35,000 lunch. You're thinking, is there a lot of people buying these bottles? And there's a number of bottles on this wine list. I totted it up and it's close to 100k. I'm thinking, in Glasgow, is someone sitting with 100k's worth of wine? I don't think so. I think if someone ordered that, they would be told, unfortunately, sir, someone ordered the last bottle just a moment ago.
Well, what I imagine might happen here is a comedy moment where Basil has to come up with something that looks like or could be mistaken for this fancy wine. He doesn't know how expert the guy is and all this sort of thing. But that wasn't the way they went.
No. Anyway, an agitated Mr. Hutchinson reappears, claiming to have wiped out the hotel phone's earpiece for him. Doing a good deed there.
Nice of him.
He is, of course, dissatisfied with the tepid ginger beer that is on his table.
Well, you would be.
Yeah.
I think this is one time where he is reasonable. If you order a drink, you want it cold.
Yeah, I mean, why are they not storing these drinks in the fridge?
There's nothing worse. Like even if you order a soft drink and it comes out of a cupboard, there's actually a food preparation place just near our office that does this. Mm-hmm. Partly because they don't have power.
That's why I never eat there.
No, none of us do.
No. So he asks for an ice bucket as we see Basil struggling with the cork in Mr. Walt's wine bottle.
Yes, it's a series of cork-related calamities as Basil takes 3 tries to get the actual cork out. Again, I thought he's going to push this cork in and splash the wine all over. But it wasn't quite that bad. He got the cork out, I think, at least partially. Mm-hmm. Because it poured a bit funny, didn't it?
Yeah, after a while, and he gets some wine over the table as well.
Yeah. Mr. Walt is not happy with the wine.
No, he immediately calls it out as being corked, and I don't think Basil understands what that term means.
He's not heard it before, but fortunately Walt explains for Basil and any viewers who didn't know. Basil tries the wine for himself.
He does, and I think he when he first takes a sip, he's thinking, I'll just pretend it's fine anyway, but even he can't hide the fact that it is ghastly.
Yeah, he has a very strong physical reaction.
So he's forced to accept that it's off and another bottle will be required.
He goes to get another bottle and is pleasant to all the other guests as he walks by.
Is he?
Yes, he wishes everybody well, and he checks what Mr. Walt has ordered to eat and makes sure he's going to prepare a spare version of that dish.
You have a second lamb on standby. However, before he can pour the second bottle, Sybil asks him into the reception to deliver some upsetting news.
Yes, she has taken the liberty of lifting a second handset, or whatever you would call it, to listen in on Mr. Hutchinson's call.
Well, I don't think she was going that far. I think perhaps she was just standing nearby.
No, I think she talks about things that were said on both ends of the call.
You sure?
Yeah, because Basil questions this.
Okay.
I think she's gone into the lounge and lifted the other phone and listened into the whole call.
Well, I wouldn't put it past her.
Basil's furious to hear this. Well, I was wondering, why did Sybil tell him? Why did she not just let him continue being nice?
Did we confirm what Sybil...
Sorry, Sybil's, yes, he's a spoons salesman.
Yeah.
And as I said in the
There's no such thing.
summary, and he's not... I think he works for a cutlery company more generally.
Yeah.
And he's not an inspector. Why would Sybil tell him this? He's being nice to the guest. That's what she wants.
Yes, but he's being nice to him and ignoring everyone else. Plus, she doesn't want to see him stressed out any more than... Not for his, necessarily for his benefit, but I think she doesn't like him flailing around the place.
Yeah, causing trouble.
He can't handle this. And I think he threatens to get the little rat.
Yeah, but Sybil quite rightly points out it was Basil's assumption, and Mr. Hutchinson never claimed to be any kind of inspector, and Basil ultimately has to accept that this is true.
Well, yeah, unconvincingly, he agrees to this, but stalks back into the dining room and confronts Hutchinson.
Spoons, eh?
I'm sorry? I beg your pardon?
I understand you're in the spoon trade.
Oh, well, yes.
Ah, fascinating, fascinating. How absorbing for you.
Yes, well, as a matter
So much more interesting than being a hotel inspector.
What? Well, thank you. No, dear Miss.
Yes?
I didn't order that.
Is there something we can get you, Mr. Hutchinson? A tea cosy for your pepper pot, perhaps?
No. I changed the order, you see.
What seems to be the trouble?
Well, I thought Mr. Hutchinson ordered an omelette.
No, he went off it, Polly, so we changed the order. It's perfectly simple.
Well, I'm sorry, but I wasn't told.
Well, I told Chef, so he should have told you.
Well, he didn't.
Well, is that my fault?
No, is it mine?
No, it is.
What?
It's the chef's fault.
I beg your pardon?
Well, clearly, in a case like this, where the order's been changed, the chef's been informed, it's his responsibility.
You want to run the place?
You what?
You want to come and run the hotel?
Eh?
Right, Mr. Hutchinson's taking over, Polly, so I'll have the omelette. I'm sure with his natural charm and wide experience, we no more problems. Come on, can't sit around all day. There's lots to be done.
No.
Haven't you?
What is going on, Basil?
Hello, dear.
That's a perfectly reasonable reaction from Basil, in my opinion.
Sybil, for a change, decides to take over the situation and resolve the matter as Basil looks for the bottle that he had placed on the sideboard.
Yes, it's not there. We can see that there is a bottle, however, on Mr. Walt's table, but Basil doesn't clock this and asks Manuel, who says he took it away.
Yes, because he thinks he means the corked one and admits that, he removed it, which results in what?
Basil hits him with a dirty spoon. He gets gravy on his forehead. Sybil, at this point, comes out with patty for Mr. Hutchinson. The problem is that Manuel has put Mr. Walt's order down on that table before he was moved.
So Sybil is not dealing with it as well as what she'd expected.
No, and Basil takes delight in this, doesn't he?
Yes, he certainly does. He then opens another bottle of wine for Mr. Walt, only to find that he has one already on his table that Manuel has opened for him,
I think it makes sense at this point that this is a relatively expensive wine because he sits it down on the Major's table and he swipes it.
Yeah.
So if it was a bit more expensive than the one that the Major maybe usually gets the house red, probably, then that would make sense and that would be funny.
Things get worse as Polly now puts down Mr. Walt's lamb in front of Hutchinson.
At this point, you can start to understand why Mr. Hutchinson might be a bit fed up.
Yes, because even Basil has to admit that that was not what he ordered.
Yeah, but I don't think he's doing that as a confession. I think he's taunting Polly and Sybil at this point because they're meant to be handling it because he couldn't. Sybil says he couldn't handle it, so they're making just as big a mess of it as he would have.
Asking who took the order, he is enraged to find that it was Manuel and loses control as he firstly shouts on him and then gives him a slap before telling Hutchinson to shut up.
Hutchinson is not pleased at this, but Polly backs Basil up a little bit.
Yes, they both work together to confuse
They tag
Hutchinson.
team him, don't they?
Yeah. It was, a nice sort of visual...
I liked it. I like this very much. They are able to persuade him that Basil was almost certainly talking to Polly, even though he was looking at Mr. Hutchinson.
Yeah. Back with Mr. Walt, Basil apologises for Manuel's service and explains that he is from Barcelona before boasting that the chef buys his own patty.
Walt is incredulous at this idea of buying patty as Manuel scurries in and grabs the plate away. I think he doesn't want to get hit again.
Yeah. I think he's asked about the wine and he admits that it is very good and has a full body.
Yeah, well, he's got a little bit of arseholery here, as he says. It tasted a bit like a 66. Basil picks up the bottle to test the body by checking the weight, and he concurs and says it's always a pleasure to meet someone who appreciates the boudoir of the grape.
Yes. And he gets caught out trying to be a wine snob, as we heard at the top of the podcast, and accusing Mr. Walt of liking the grape too much.
But he then asks whether Walt is here on business, as his casserole's served. And Walt says he is. There's 3 of them down and the other 2 are in a different hotel.
Mm-hmm. And they are not in the wine trade.
Nor is he a wine expert, despite his earlier.
So there is a delayed reaction from Basil on hearing Walt is in a party of 3 and is now convinced that he must be an inspector and again goes over the score in his grovelling.
But he's interrupted by Manuel serving Mr. Hutchinson the omelette again.
Yeah, so he goes over, what does he do?
Does he thump Manuel again? I didn't even notice.
He rips up the omelette.
Yes, he takes the omelette and tears it away, and then Polly shows up with the salad.
And at this point as well, I think he's getting anxious because Hutchinson is reeling off a list of complaints.
Yes, he doesn't want Walt to hear these, although obviously he's hearing everything. And Basil is quite concerned that this is going to go badly, so he physically restrains Hutchinson.
Well, he resorts to choking him out face first into his cheese salad.
I think he's trying to gag him at first. He's got a grip around his neck and Hutchinson passes out. Basil at this point claims that he's choked on some cheese and he's passed out, he's fainted. I think Bernard Cribbins, who plays Hutchinson, said that John Cleese was a bit rough with him and he had to ask him to back off a little bit. Yeah,
there are a number of times, I think more so in maybe next week's episode, where you can hear and feel that no punches have been pulled, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see quite a lot in interviews with John Cleese and with Andrew Sachs that they didn't really hold back, and I think John Cleese was less concerned about that than Andrew Sachs was. Because he was the one on the receiving end most of the time. I think Cleese was of the opinion that it had to be real to look real.
Yeah, the sacrifices you make for your art.
Yeah, sacrifices other people make for his art, yes.
Basil and Manuel then carry the prone Hutchinson through to the bar as Sybil looks on in horror, not believing the story that he simply fainted due to getting a piece of cheese stuck in his throat.
Yes, Sybil notes that doesn't make you faint.
No.
And demands that Basil call a doctor.
She does. But he still has the nerve to ask Mr. Walt for compliments as he uses the phone before a groggy Hutchinson comes through and violently assaults him.
Yeah, Basil quite pleasantly commiserates with him about choking on a wee bit of cheese. Yeah. I think Hutchinson's memory has not been affected.
No, he punches him a few times, he elbows him in the stomach, he knocks him to the floor.
He goes full on giant haystacks on him, I think. He actually beats him up.
Yeah, I think he challenges him to stand up and fight like a man.
And then he makes it worse. He says that the hotel is badly run and Basil is both rude and discourteous. Yeah, I think, is that after Basil uses the old leg injury excuse to stop him from He doesn't go fully into the explanation. He just says he's got a sore leg and can't get up.
Hutchinson leaves and basically says that he won't be paying.
Yes, he comes back with a flying elbow to the ribs and says, yes, that's it, he doesn't expect a bill.
And even after all of this, Basil still has the temerity to try and put a positive spin on it for Mr. Walt.
Incidentally, I don't know if you realise, but he's a regular customer of ours. Oh, he loves it here. It's his second home. It's just that we always have to have this little... I don't know why, but he seems to like it.
Really?
Yes, the only danger is, though, that somebody's going to think he really isn't satisfied about something, or the fighting's real, you know, and tell somebody. You won't mention it, will you? We'd love to offer you dinner here tonight as our guest to show our gratitude.
What?
A dinner tonight, would you?
No, I can't tonight, thank you.
Tomorrow night?
I shall be leaving tomorrow, I'm sorry.
All right, £50 then.
Beg your pardon?
£50, not to mention it.
£50?
So 60, not to write about it, you know, I mean, articles, books, letters.
I'm afraid I really don't.
Oh, please. It's taken us 12 years to build this place up. Don't put this in the book. We're finished if you don't. Please don't.
Book? What book?
The hotel guy. Oh, sorry. I shouldn't have mentioned it. Oh, what have I done?
You've got me confused with someone else. I'm nothing to do with any hotel guide. I'm down here for the exhibition. I sell outboard motors. All right?
I think Basil is of the view that you don't talk about hotel inspectors with hotel inspectors. That maybe guarantees a bad review.
Yeah. Another great performance there by John Cleese.
That was quite upsetting to see him so sad.
Yeah, but he does very quickly, the switch can flick.
Yes. Once he believes Walt is not an inspector, he gives him a kiss on the hand, thanks him, and then, as a thought, and grabs Manuel.
What's that?
Well, he's going to do something with Manuel's aid. We'll find out a wee bit later on.
Just then, a trio of hotel inspectors enter in time to see what?
Mr. Hutchinson, about to leave. He comes down the stairs looking very unhappy, and Manuel comes out and asks him to wait because Mr. Fawlty wants to say adios.
How does he do that?
Well, first of all, he puts a custard pie in the crotch of Mr. Hutchinson. He follows it up with a second to the face and then grabs his briefcase, opens the briefcase and has Manuel pour custard inside the briefcase, just as the Major wanders by.
All perfectly understandable and acceptable.
Proportionate, I would say. That would be my word for it. Proportionate.
Indeed. And then he throws him out of the hotel.
He does.
His delight, however, is short-lived when he asks what he can do for the three gentlemen standing in front of him, and he lets out a scream.
An anguished scream, I would say.
So there we have it. Can't really fault this episode.
It's a lot of fun, right from the start. I think the guest stars help make it with their performances, but I think it's very good.
And also, it was an episode lacking in any, I suppose, unsavoury 70s attitudes. There was no hint at anything really. There was no racism or sexism or...
Yeah, it was good. It was hilarious at times and consistently funny.
Okay, it's quite a long episode already. Let's fly through anything else that we have.
Okay.
10th of October 1975 was the original air date, and it was broadcast on BBC Two, Mr. Hutchinson's favourite channel.
Of course.
He was played by Bernard Cribbins, as you mentioned earlier. Born in 1928, maybe most famous for The Railway Children, some of the Carry On movies, Doctor Who, Coronation Street, The Wombles, Cribbins, he had his own show, Frenzy, Alfred Hitchcock there, and recently I have been exposed to him as Old Jack in Old Jack's Boat. It's a kid's CBBC, I think it is.
He has a look of the Captain Birdseye's father about him these days.
Yeah.
He was obviously, I mean, you said Doctor Who quite quickly. He was in the more recent Doctor Who and he was quite a prominent role and he was well regarded for his performances in that.
Well, to add to that, at 79, he is the oldest actor to play a Doctor Who companion, 40 years after playing a companion for the first time in one of the Peter Cushing movies.
There you go.
And I believe that he was actually considered for the role of the Doctor himself at one point.
Was not chosen.
Mr. Walt was played by James Cossins. He died in 1997, aged, now this is quite incredible, 63. So I make it he was around 42 in this episode. 42. He easily have passed for 62.
So basically he's barely older than you are now.
Yes, barely older than we are now, yeah.
A wee bit more older than I am.
Well, barely.
Anyway.
42.
He doesn't look... I wouldn't have pinned him for 42, I have to say.
What was it you told me the other day about Tom Cruise?
Apparently Tom Cruise is now 3 years older than Richard Wilson was when he started One Foot in the Grave as Victor Meldrew.
Yeah, that's what Hollywood Buddy can do for you. Back to James Cossins. He was also in The Man with the Golden Gun, Gandhi, Bergerac, All in Good Faith, Good Night and God Bless, Zed Cars, Pretenders and Compact. I'll mention one of the hotel inspectors at the end. It was the bearded fellow. He looked a bit like the Yorkshire Ripper.
Okay.
I think his name was Brian, and he was played by Peter Brett. And the reason he's being noted is that he was previously married to Carol Cleveland, who is known as the female Python.
Okay, yes.
And he himself has appeared in Life of Brian, some of the Monty Python episodes, Dixon of Dock Green, and also Doctor Who.
Fair enough.
And we'll finish with a biggie.
Okay.
Andrew Sachs.
I'm going to call him Big. He's quite short.
Sadly, died in 2016, aged 86. He was born in Berlin and moved to England aged 8 in 1930 for obvious reasons. As well as Fawlty Towers, he has appeared in The Six Proud Walkers, The Basil Brush Show, Monkey, Every Silver Lining, Big Bag, that Peter Kay thing, I think, is a voice actor.
Okay.
Coronation Street, Casualty, EastEnders, Doctor Who, Shada, whatever that is. As mentioned, he is actually a prolific voice actor, as is his son John, who was the voice of in Gladiators back in the 90s.
Yes, of course, John Sachs. Yes.
And his grandson Brandon, I think he's based in Hollywood.
His cousin Yakety is well known.
Very good. But sadly, he will forever be associated with the unsavoury prank call involving Jonathan Ross and Russell Brand. I don't think we need to get into too much detail about
No,
that.
other than that they are idiots
They certainly were,
and treated him with disrespect.
without a doubt. Any trivia for us this week?
There's only one thing that I hadn't mentioned before, but the scene near the end where Hutchinson beats up Basil. John Cleese was not happy with his own performance, apparently, in that scene. He felt he overplayed the impact of the blows, and then when he was talking to Walt afterwards, he wasn't happy with the way he played the being injured and talking. He didn't like it.
Okay, I'm going to continue my run of saying John Cleese is wrong.
You like that?
Yeah, I thought it was fine.
It didn't stand out to me as anything particularly egregious, but I suppose artists can
Of
be
course.
nitpicky.
Oh yeah, they're perfectionists, and I think Cleese is, and obviously with the show, the amount of effort and time put into these 12 episodes is testament to that.
Yeah, but nothing's ever going to be perfect.
No. I think Fawlty Towers is about as perfect as you're going to get if you ignore some of the things that are not as perfect in
Well,
2018.
everything's great if you ignore the things that aren't perfect. I mean, if you only consider the perfect parts.
It would have been perfect for its time, and it's obviously some things have dated, but
Sure.
okay, what do I have? There was a mention, I can't remember, at some point, Bill Morton is name checked, and he was a vision mixer on the show. And during one of the clips, we heard Basil suggest a tea cosy for your pepper pot.
Yes.
Pepper pot was a name used by the Pythons to describe the middle-aged, middle-class women that they used to play in drag. Your favourite scene this week?
Oh, I quite like the introduction of Mr. Hutchinson and the drawing of the map and the payoff and everything else.
Sure.
That was good.
I'm going for a similar but slightly later scene, and it's when Hutchinson requests to reserve the TV and Basil's about-turning attitude.
Okay.
The sign this week, what have we got?
Yes, it is again, I think, an iteration on the previous week's one. It's just FAW, then a gap TY, and then the next line TO gap ER.
Or you could say missing L and missing W and S.
Yeah, but then you wouldn't know where the things. There's more than one W.
Okay.
So anyway, it's the ones that were hanging off last week have fallen off. Basically, I think they've come to the end of this particular gimmick.
Next week, we have Gourmet Night.
Excellent, we're doing a podcast as well. Okay.
What else do we eat? A mouthful of it.
That'll be delightful for the people who like mouth sounds on their
Very
podcasts.
uncouth. Fawlty Towers ASMR.
Apparently there are podcasts where people eat while they're talking.
Oh, there certainly is, yeah.
I've never listened to one. I think I would probably vomit.
No doubt.
Anyway, we'll see you next week.
Cheerio.
Bye.